So when you're starting your seedlings indoors, you definitely want to make sure that you are potting them up or putting them in appropriate sized containers so that they don't become root bound and you don't stunt their growth. So I like to start my tomatoes in one container. So there's literally probably close to 40 tomatoes in this little tiny container. One of the great things is when you're using a see-through container like this is I can simply lift up and I can see the roots. Now, none of these are circling around. You don't want the roots to begin to circle around because then they become root bound and that can be detrimental to them growing and you're stunting their growth. But these guys are definitely large enough that we need to get them separated out and into their own pots. Now, timing wise, I started these tomatoes 4 weeks ago from seed. So these are 4 weeks old, but I've got another at least 4 weeks, if not 6 weeks, depending upon our weather, before these can be potted outdoors and in the ground. So they definitely need to be separated out. I prefer to just separate them out when they're large like this. I don't like to thin them when they're small and tiny. I find it easier to just grow them like this and then separate them out as I'm potting them individually. Now, because I know that these tomatoes are only going to be in containers for about 4 more weeks before they're plotted outside, you do want to make sure that you're transplanting them into a large enough container. So these are 4-inch containers, so I wouldn't go any smaller. This is the smallest I would go for potting these out. And if you know they're going to be in a container for longer than 4 weeks, once they're this size, then I would definitely recommend going something larger. So you could go this size, and I even also have some larger containers like this, which are about really approximate and close, but like that. However, I do prefer when I'm potting them that it's something that has drain holes in the bottom so that I can use a tray to water them from the bottom. Once they're this size, I'm no longer doing any top spraying like I do when they're little baby seedlings with a spray bottle. I prefer to just do the water from the bottom. So you can also use, I've used very successfully in the past, if you don't have 4-inch pots or you don't want to go and buy 4-inch pots, you can definitely use a red solo cup. They come in very handy and will do just fine for one individual tomato plant if you don't plan on having them in these for an extended long period of time. So I have a new bag of potting soil here because these are going to be potted, but then they're going to go right back into the house because we're still having temperatures down in the 20-degree Fahrenheit mark at night. And this is potting soil, which is fine if you have potting soil left over from the year before. However, this has been open and left outside, so I know there's a good likelihood that there are gnats or other insect eggs in this soil, and I don't really want them hatching and loose in my house. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this brand new bag of potting soil. Now, I choose to buy only certified organic or OMRI certified potting soil. Totally up to you. But this is a big bag of potting soil that's organic that I get at Costco, actually. They have it every spring, and you get this huge bag, and it's only like $8. So I usually buy one bag every spring for doing all of my potted plants. So when I'm potting up the tomatoes, one, you want to make sure you're keeping your varieties straight. So I've got in here, this section right here are my San Marzano, which this is one of my main paste tomatoes. I'm also doing an Amish paste. So I planted my paste tomatoes together, but I do have them individually marked out as to what is what. So when I'm separating them out, I just like to start at the side. I don't wear gloves. I find it's just easier to do your hands. And if you're a gardener, you should like the dirt, right? So we're just going to scoop down in here, and I'm going to lift out a large section. Okay. So here we've got 3. You can see some of the roots there at the bottom, and I just gently separate them. So here's this guy. You can see all of the roots there, and I'm just going to put it right in there, and we're going to do the same with these ones. So you can see how long, look how long some of those roots are. It's very surprising the root system that you get on a tomato plant. A lot of people don't realize how big of a root system they have. So I'm just going to put those in the center, and I want to make sure that they're down in there nice and deep. The reason I want to make sure that they're in there nice and deep is because you want to bury your tomato plants up to the first set of leaves. Now, this is not the true leaf. This is the very first set of leaves that you get when a plant has germinated, and you can see this is much different. This doesn't look like the regular leaves. So your actually set of true leaves are right here. These will fall off as the plant begins to mature. So I like to make sure when I'm repotting, I will actually remove these now. They'll turn yellow and fall off on their own within a couple weeks anyways. And I'm going to put the soil all the way up to here, because tomatoes, any part of this stem that is covered in soil will begin to produce roots. And we want to develop a really good root system and large root system on our tomato plants, because that's what is going to help create a lot of tomatoes and a really nice, healthy, robust plant, because obviously the roots is what feeds the plant and helps with its development. So the bigger the root system, the more you have going into the plant and then your tomatoes. So one of the first things that I like to do, and I'm going to even do it before we get the rest of these done, is to make sure when you're transplanting, you want to make sure that they're getting adequate water, because this soil was obviously bagged and dried. The soil is not, and they're used to being indoors underneath a grow light, and they're actually out here in direct sunlight, which we happen to have today, and I don't want to get them stressed out too much. So for this first time, I'm just going to go ahead and do a little bit of water on top. These are outdoors, so I know that the water is going to evaporate off of them, and then I'll be watering from down beneath further. But I want to go ahead and get this soil nice and wet. And then, because I don't have any of this, go ahead and pour some water in here, and then the roots will, through the little holes, they'll absorb the water from underneath. So you can see these ones are a little bit closer together and some of their roots are entangled, but just gently begin to work them apart with your fingers, and they'll come apart, and we didn't break off or destroy any of the root system there. You can tell this guy, when they were, crowded in like that, some of them obviously had germinated a little bit faster, and so this one is larger, but they'll all pretty much catch up to one another once we get them separated out and they're in their own growing area. So as I'm separating these out, I always overplant when I'm planting my seeds, just in case all of them don't germinate and that I've got plenty. But at this part, I like to take the largest ones, so the ones with the best root systems and are the largest, and those are the ones that I'm going to keep and get potted up first. So I already removed this guy. He was a lot smaller. And then even like this one compared to this one, you can see here, this has a lot more of a root system on it than this one. And it is a little bit larger stemmed. They're almost the same size with their leaves, but because this has a bigger root system, I'm gonna go ahead and elect to keep these. So I always make sure I get the largest ones done first, and then if I have enough pots left over, I'll pot up some of the smaller ones, but I try to be really selective in the beginning. So you can see with these ones that are now in the shade and got watered, these guys are already perking up. Some of these you might be a little worried. You're like, whoo, they look a little stressed or they're getting a little wilted. This is to be completely expected whenever you are transplanting. And also these have been in indoor conditions and they're not used to being in direct sunlight, and it's surprisingly hot out today for this time of year. So they definitely need watering. But a lot of times what people will see with their tomato starts is you'll see purple on the underneath side of some of these leaves. And especially because they're so wilted, they're kind of falling over and we can really see the underneath side of the leaves. So usually when you start to see purple developing on tomato leaves, it's a sign of a nutrient deficiency. And most often it means that they are getting low in potassium. So I don't use any type of fertilizer in the potting mix that I buy. I just buy the potting mix that already has some compost in there. But part of the reason we're seeing that is I had that many tomato plants was in just this tiny little amount, and they had already in 4 weeks used all of the nutrients that was in this soil. So that's part of the issue. They now all have a lot more soil, but I also like to water with a fertilizer mixture. So the favorite one that I like to use is a fish fertilizer. So it won't burn them. It's a 5-1-1, but it has some nitrogen because we obviously need nitrogen. And I find that the regular potting soil, even with the compost in there, just doesn't have enough nutrients to really sustain these guys after a couple of weeks. So I'm going to give these guys a nice watering, even though they have brand new soil, and I've already mixed up my fish fertilizer with the water. And you definitely, when you're using this, these are going back inside. But I like to do the water with the fish fertilizer when I'm fertilizing them outside because it does kind of smell. It's from fish. So I like to water these guys outside with the fish fertilizer. And then once it has some time to kind of absorb into the soil and dissipate, then it doesn't make the house smell. But I am not known for being neat and tidy, if you can't tell from my potting bench here. So I usually end up spilling some of the fish fertilizer. So I have just learned my lessons. It's better to water with them with this stuff outside, let it soak into the soil and kind of dissipate a little bit, and then move it inside. And like I said, this is one of the few times I'll actually water overhead these guys, just because this is all dry soil right now, and they're really going to soak this up. So you will be shocked, but literally within just a few hours, these will be perked up and looking nice and happy and healthy. And they're gonna be staying under the grow light, like I said, for about another 4 weeks. And I'm just kind of looking at the height. By the time these are all standing up, I'm gonna lower this just a little bit. I like my grow lights to be just about 1 inch, no more than 2 inches from the top of the plants. When you're using a grow light, even though this is a light bulb that is meant, it's a full spectrum light bulb, it's not as intense as regular daylight. Here we just don't get enough daylight for me to do this indoors without using a grow light. But even with a grow light, if you have it too far above the plants, they'll still reach towards the light and they can get really leggy. So I like to put mine just about 1 inch from the top. I'll wait till these are fully perked up so I can do a little bit more accurate measuring when they're gonna be their height. But you also want to be using your grow light for about 15 to 16 hours a day. A lot of times people will do their own seed starting in their starts, but they don't realize that the grow light, because it's weaker than regular sunlight, and of course sunlight, you don't need 18 or 16 hours of sunlight in order for your starts to grow. But if you're using a grow light situation, you really do need it to be on for about 16 hours a day so that they get sufficient light in order to grow. Now, the exciting part is when we can actually get these babies in the ground and they'll really start growing well for us, which also means as we get closer to planting day that my mind naturally goes towards the maintenance of the garden and weeding. So if you want to have a garden that has less weeds than it ever has before, or learning some different tips for managing weeds, make sure that you go and check out that video next.